There was a day when Atlantic cod were critical to the economy and cultural lifeblood of the Commonwealth. The species was considered so vital, the Massachusetts legislature ceremoniously hung a large wooden fish in the House chamber dubbed the sacred cod. But the days when decks of fishing vessels were piled high with cod are long gone, and they may never return. Even with today's strict fishing limits, stocks continue to drop, raising concerns over whether it's the end of the line for New England cod fishing. Here to explain further is our WGBH News science editor, Heather Goldstone. Welcome to you, Heather.
Good to be here.
So before we get into this crisis, just remind us of, why the cod was so important.
Well, cod have been fished for hundreds of years. It started in Europe. They were one of the first ocean fish species actually to be targeted for food. And when stocks there were depleted, fishermen started going further and further afield. They went up towards Greenland, over to the Labrador Sea, and then started coming down our way to Gulf of Maine and to Georges Bank. And there have been fishermen here for longer than there's been in the United States, for 400 years, fishing for cod. It was also nice that they could salt it and dry it and take it back. It would actually last the trip back to Europe. So it was kind of a staple food. And in addition to being an economic driver for a long time, it isn't nearly the economic boon that it was at one time, but it's a major part of our heritage here. So
what's going on now in the Gulf of Maine? What's the crisis?
Well, so the Gulf of Maine fishery is one of two major stocks that's fished in New England. You can see on this map, the Gulf of Maine is kind of the darker blue in the middle there, Georges Bank, the shallower area just outside those, and those are two separate stocks. And the concern right now is about that Gulf of Maine stock. So 2 years ago, the assessment of that population said things don't look good. We need to really dramatically cut back on fishing. They cut catch allowances by 80%, which triggered $32.8 million in financial aid from the federal government for a fisheries disaster. And yet, 2 years later, scientists have come back and said, we weren't even due to do a full assessment yet, but we're looking at the data and it looks even worse. The decline has gotten steeper. They're down to 3 to 4% of the number of reproductively active fish that they would like to see to support a healthy fishery and a healthy population. So it seems like the decline has actually accelerated even in the face of those cuts.
Is it all about overfishing? Because Canada went through this in the 1990s. Was it that too, or is there something else going on?
Well, so no, it's definitely not just overfishing. That's one of the longest standing and greatest pressures facing these fish, but certainly climate change is a part of it, probably making it harder for the fish to bounce back. We know it's affecting the plankton that the cod eat. We know that it's affecting the water temperature, and that affects the ability of the cod to reproduce and to grow. But if we look to the Canadian fisheries, so to our north and our east, was actually one of the largest. So that red line delineates U.S. versus Canada, and over there to the Grand Banks, the Labrador Sea was actually one of the largest cod fisheries. And in the early 90s, they saw a major drop in catches. And I think we actually have a graph that shows just how steep. By 1992, they closed the fishery. And one thing that's interesting about that is how rapid that decline was, and the fact that it wasn't fully explained by fishing restrictions or fishing pressure either, just as ours isn't now. There's some similarities there. The other similarity was you see that peak just before. Some fishermen in Canada actually recorded record catches just before the crash. And they think what was happening, what they were seeing, is that the fish basically gathered in a few areas to literally make a last stand. And we're seeing something similar happen in New England waters too, where the fish aren't evenly spread out anymore. They're forming these clumps, these aggregations that seem to be a sign of real stress in the population.
All right, well, so before we go, Woods Hole has been circulating this very cool shark video that they've taken underwater. So we're going to play some of it, and you can kind of tell us what's happening
so this is a little underwater vehicle called Remus that they outfitted with 5 different cameras. We're looking at a rear-facing camera here, and what they did is they tagged great white sharks with an acoustic tag, and then they put a sensor on the vehicle to have it go follow the sharks. And instead, the hunter became the hunted. The great white sharks decided they didn't like this thing swimming around and attacked it voraciously. They'd come up from behind it, they'd come up from underneath it, and they don't seem ready to let go, even though that clearly can't feel or taste like a seal. So got some great video. It's been part of Shark Week, and as you said, it's gone completely viral.
And have they ruined the cameras yet, or no?
Oh, well, there was definitely some damage to the vehicle, but it didn't completely destroy it.
That is very cool. I got to go watch more of that. All right. Heather Goldstone, always a pleasure to have you.
All right, good to be here.
All right.